hard to hear. But thank you for coming out tonight to hear about the plan of conservation and development. And it's certainly a pleasure to be here at the new Community Senior Center to give the presentation. I know Eric was working hard yesterday trying to get it all working, and it is, at least it appears to be so far. It's in John's hands now, but we'll go from there. We've got some water and cookies. Please eat lots of cookies, because otherwise I'll take them home and finish them, and I'll do even more laps around the lake. Restrooms over here, if you don't know it, and that's, we've got plenty of exits in the event of some kind of an emergency that we would have to go out. But again, thank you. I wanted to give an update to the community on all the surveys. You know, we had like 200 and some people fill out a survey and give us input, and I thought it was time to let people know what was going on with that. And there was a couple other things that I didn't want to wait until we're done with the plan to get feedback from you. So this is a session for you. We can ask questions. I don't want to be here all night. I don't think we will, but certainly we're interested in your feedback. Make sure that there's something that you think we're not hitting on. Right. And with that, I'll turn it over to our town planner, John Kuzkowski, and he'll take you through the presentation.
Hi everybody. So for folks I haven't met in person, I'm John Kuzkowski, the town planner, working with the town for about a year now. And for the folks on planning and zoning, this is me in actual 3 dimensions, rather than just on a Zoom screen. So I do exist in real life. So we're here, as Jed said, to talk a little bit about the plan of conservation and development. We're at about, I don't know, maybe around the halfway point of our plan. It's by no means a done deal. It's still evolving. We're still writing it. And so this is just a point to check in with the public, let you know sort of how we got to where we are and what's ahead. First, a little bit about what a plan of conservation and development is. This is a document that is mandated by the state of Connecticut, the Connecticut General Statutes, that basically requires every municipality in the state, at least every 10 years, to basically update a master plan. And it is a task that's assigned specifically to the Planning Commission. In this case, Andover, like many towns, has a joint Planning and Zoning Commission, but it's actually a separate function. So the plan is charged to the Planning Commission to basically come up with a master plan for the development and the conservation of all manner of things in town. And there's a list here of certain things that have to be considered. Things like recreation, utilities, public safety, affordable housing, energy conservation, open space. All of these things are required by the state statute. From a practical standpoint, obviously there's a mandate that the town has to do it. And if the town does not, it is at risk of losing discretionary state funds. So grants of the type that help us buy open space or help us build trails or help us extend sidewalk networks, all of those things are basically tied to the town's completion and update of this plan. So it absolutely behooves the town to complete it. Beyond that, there's a couple of ways that a plan of conservation and development is used by municipalities. Every time the town makes a significant investment, municipal improvement, whether that's building a new road, extending the water line, building a school, doing renovations to a school, buying a piece of open space, selling land for tax purposes, all of those municipal transactions, if you will, are statutorily required to be referred to the Planning Commission and ask the question, does this move, does this acquisition, does this sale, does this improvement meet the goals of the Plan of Conservation and Development? And the Planning Commission basically has to, look through their plan and say, yep, we're interested in buying this piece of open space, we definitely support it. If the Planning Commission finds that that municipal investment does not meet the Plan of Conservation and Development, it essentially gets a veto over that municipal investment or municipal improvement. That would then require a town like Andover, which is a town meeting town, to basically override that veto by a 2/3 majority. So the plan of conservation and development, in many ways, is sort of a check against misallocating municipal funds or misdirecting investments. But on the positive side, it can also be used to forward goals. So if the town expresses a specific goal, we want to preserve this area of town, or we want to develop a community center here, if it's in the plan of conservation and development, it can then be used and really strengthen a grant application, a request for state, federal, nonprofit, foundation funds, because it clearly expresses the town's goal in support of that project. In addition, sort of more of a nuts and bolts thing, the town's zoning rules, the zoning regulations, are explicitly meant to deliver upon the goals of the plan of conservation and development. So for instance, if the town expresses in the plan that we wish to expand housing opportunities through accessory dwelling units, through accessory apartments or granny flats or something like that, the zoning regulations are meant to reflect that. And so every time the Planning and Zoning Commission sort of opens up the zoning regulations for amendment or for revision, they also must check against the plan of conservation and development to make sure that we're delivering upon the goals that are expressed in that document. And I should also, there's plenty of seating over here. And also, obviously the acoustics are bad, but please feel free to interrupt with questions. This is not a super formal process at all. And then finally, just philosophically, the plan of conservation and development is meant to be a state, a vision document that basically says, this is where we are, this is where we want to go over the next 10 years, and this is how we're going to get there. And ideally, it should really influence a lot of town decision making at an administrative level, at a regulatory level, at an investment level. And it is sort of ideally the roadmap for the town's next 10 years. Despite the fact that the state mandates this plan that has all kinds of elements in it, there actually is no mandated process for how you get to your plan of conservation and development. And every town is free and very frequently takes advantage of that freedom to take their own path in developing the plan. In the case of Andover, it was decided, again, because it is a creature of the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Planning Commission, the writing and the guidance of this plan development is being managed essentially in the Planning and Zoning Commission itself, with guidance from Eric as the town manager and myself as town planner to help shape this document on behalf of the commission. We have the current plan, which is a 2015 plan. It expires, I think, mid-year, and next year, mid-2025. And so we are basically taking that as our basis of operations and sort of our basis of philosophy and sort of building from there. Sort of taking a look at the goals we established almost 10 years ago, saying, how have we accomplished, how have we met these goals? How have we achieved some of these things? What things have dropped away? And if you think back 10 years ago, it's hard to think back more than 4 years ago because COVID seemed to have changed everything. Changed everything about, how we live, how we work, how we, interrelate, how we communicate, how, towns picture themselves. And so a lot has changed even in the last half decade. So it's very much worth revisiting. So we take a look at where we've been over the last 10 years. Again, not only how we've done in delivering on the goals of the last plan, but how have we changed? How has our demographic profile changed? How has our development makeup? Where have we built? Where have we preserved? What things have been improved? What things have been eliminated? We are also checking against the state. The state has a plan of conservation and development. It's referred to as the State Conservation and Development Policies Plan. They've established 6 responsible growth principles, which are basically smart growth principles, as the jargon was maybe 20 years ago. But it's basically focused development on areas where you've got infrastructure, where you have major transportation corridors, where you have sewer, water, population centers. Those should be the places that grow first. Most of our natural areas should be preserved, particularly environmentally sensitive areas. And we should try to grow in a way that respects equity, environment, as well as economic opportunity. So the state establishes those principles. develop our approach, it should ideally reflect those state principles as well, in addition to local priorities. In determining what the local priorities are, we've done a couple of things. We did a community survey that Jed responded to, and we had actually a very good turnout. I don't remember the number of responses exactly. We'll take a look in a second. But for a town of Andover size, it was a very good representation. And again, this, and I'm sure many of you took the survey, so you know what we were asking. We were asked about basically priorities. What are your conservation priorities? What are your development priorities? What are things you're looking forward to over the next 10 years? What are things you're concerned about? And basically to try to help the Planning and Zoning Commission identify where the priority areas are. As well as looking at existing town plans. There was a town capital improvements plan a couple of years ago that we were basically using and building off of. And then the part that we are just about to really ramp up is to have individualized conversations with stakeholder groups about specific things. And I know that the members of the Conservation Commission are here. We're going to have a detailed conversation about conservation priorities, areas of town we want to preserve, things that we've already preserved that we need to do a better job of maintaining, that sort of thing. And then we're going to do the same with the Economic Development Commission and other stakeholder groups in town, and have these individualized conversations, again, over the next 6 to 9 months or so. So that's where we are in the process. I'll go a little bit about the demographics, and again, you are all residents and involved citizens here, so none of this should be terribly surprising to people who have lived in Andover for any length of time. Most of our data comes from the 2020 census, which was the most recent decennial census. We have some data from the American Community Survey, which is a 5-year sort of sliding window of statistical analysis. But the 100% count data is already a couple of years old. So, not surprisingly, Andover is the vast majority non-Hispanic, white, Caucasian, almost 90% with small groups of different minority groups. Our population trends have been slightly trending down. The top graph shows us population estimates over the last, over the last 10 years that ended in 2020. So you see from 2010 to 2020 there was a slight decline. It looks more precipitous than it actually is if you look at the chart at the top. We're only talking about a couple hundred people, or what was the top one? 3,350. So we're really only talking a couple of dozen people that have moved in or out over the last over the last decade or so. The bottom chart shows you the population projections. This is by no means written in stone. It is by no means our immutable fate. But again, it is based on state statistical analysis, and sees in Andover, like a lot of similar rural communities in Connecticut, a slight drop of population over the next 15 years or so. So according to the state, again, we're looking like our recent population seems to have peaked at around 3,500, and we're going to be declining, possibly below 3,000 over the next 15 years. But again, this is not written in stone. These projections were done before COVID, and again, a lot has changed, and we've seen, Andover is not the same as, say, Boise, Idaho, which saw a crazy boom because of COVID, people escaping, other bigger cities and finding sort of a COVID, work from home type haven. A lot of the smaller towns in Connecticut saw that sort of boom as well. So these projections are a little bit.
But before you do that slide,
yeah.
The last 3 years, the population in Andover has been about the same. Might be going up a little bit, might be down a little bit, but it has certainly leveled off. Because when I started looking at the declining projections, I said, wow, this is bad news for us. And it's not necessarily that way. And it could be, there's even people thinking that due to climate change, the migration of the population from the south is going to start moving back north again, and that sort of thing. So in this slide, the official projections, I think they'll be updated at some point to show a different picture than what we got. But I was happy to see that our population is not declining, we're holding our own, which I thought was good news.
And again, the raw numbers are, the differences are extremely small. You know, where it's a small town, the difference of a couple of dozen people here and there really makes a significant difference. So we won't get too hung up on the numbers. Age distribution, again, not a particular surprise necessarily to anyone who has lived in Andover for a while. The age group distributions on the bottom chart, the light blue is back in 2000, the dark blue is in 2020. So you see the bars that get taller as they get darker are our age groups. So you can see that Andover is shifting in terms of its age, that it's the population over 45, over 55, over 65 is creeping up as a percentage of the population. Again, not a star, Connecticut is aging, small town Connecticut is aging. However, there are some positives. If you look between 2010 and 2020, our baby population, our 0 to 5 population, ticked up a little bit. So families aren't abandoning Andover in droves, but we are aging, and our household demographics reflect that. Specifically, we have a number of small households. The chart over on the left shows you household by size. And so if you combine a one-person household and two-person households, we're looking at over 60% of the town is either one or two-person households. Relatively small for a town that is so dependent on relatively large lot, relatively large house, single-family housing. And that we have relatively big houses, and you can see that we have relatively sizable houses, 3 and 4 bedroom units, but by and large, I think that might be on our next slide. But our household sizes, again, there's sort of a disconnect there. Our household size is surprisingly stable. It is both larger than Connecticut and Talon County in general. And Talon County household sizes are actually getting a little bit smaller. Andover's been relatively stable. And again, the top chart shows you basically our household type, or I'm sorry, our housing type, where we basically have the long lines, single family detached. Again, not a surprise. I would be shocked if anyone here lived in a 20-unit apartment building somewhere in Andover. I don't know if there are any of those. But we live in single family houses, but we have increasingly small household sizes. A little bit of our employment and income. Andover is relatively well-to-do compared to Talon County, and certainly compared to the state of Connecticut, where our median income for a household is just about $100,000 again. And again, I believe that's a 2020 statistic. Our unemployment rate is quite low, particularly relative to Talon County and the state. But most of the people who are employed, most Andover residents who are employed elsewhere. So the map shows you people coming into Andover. The dark green is people coming into Andover to work. The light green is people leaving Andover to work. So the vast majority of people are working elsewhere. So it's, again, reflective of a veteran community. And really only about 70 people, Eric and 69 of his closest friends, both live and work in Andover. So we conducted a survey, as we said. We put this ad in the River East and in local newsletters and publications. Hopefully people got a chance to see this. Hopefully you clicked on the link or to the QR code, again, to get feedback. So we had over 230 people fill this out, which again, with an adult population in Andover, somewhere under 3,000 people. It's a decent, survey sample. Again, so we asked them some basic questions. Do you live or work in Andover? Basically, as we saw with that job migration map, most of the people responded were either living in Andover, working in another town, or retired. Not that many people, again, living and working in Andover. So we then been asked, and you're not going to get to see all of the responses here. But we basically asked people when it came to economic development priorities, where would we like to see, where would we welcome economic development. Some of the choices were no major changes to business development, more retail on Route 6, including things like groceries, and more service, professional, medical along Route 6, more restaurants along Route 6, more small businesses and home-based businesses scattered around town where the homes are, more visitor-based businesses to sort of take advantage of the Hawk River Trail and some of the linear resources, or to focus on growing small businesses. And we ask people to rank. So, you know, your top priority is a 1, your bottom priority is a 7. The way that this gets inverted so it makes a little bit more sense on the map or on the graph is the longest bars were the most popular. The longest bars were the ones that people ranked the highest. And so, you know, nothing was far and away the favorite, but, you know, people preferred retail options and more restaurant options. Those were the 2 popular ones along Route 6, with, you know, sort of mixed support for the other options.
And if you look back at previous plans of conservation and development, that question has been asked in that basic form at least 4 times in the last 40 years. And this mirrors exactly what's been said each time, is that what people are looking for, you know, in terms of commercial development is the things they use. They want to see the grocery stores, and they want to see the drug stores, and the things they actually want to use, not necessarily business for the sake of business in the tax base, but business because they want to use them. So this is the results, you know, as you survey people seem to be the same for the last 30, 40 years.
Then we asked people about housing, and if you thought that more housing options were needed, what types of people are in need of this additional housing options. Again, the longest bars were the most popular responses. This was check all that apply. So, you know, you could check all of the options if you wanted. So the differences stand out. So young families were, young families and then seniors were easily the most popular. And then followed by young professionals, teachers, firefighters, other sort of essential in-town workers, people that can't really work outside of town because of the nature of the job. And then there was a small group, again, about 25%, that said, yeah, we're okay for housing. But this again, I think reflects what we see in a number of small towns like Andover, that seniors, young families are critically in need of more housing options. And then we asked, okay, given that, what kind of housing would be appropriate, not only for the people that need it, but would make sense in Andover, for Andover's condition. And again, check all that apply, so people could, in theory, choose a whole bunch of them. Unsurprisingly, single-family residences. That's what's in Andover, that's what feels like Andover, that's been our development pattern, and for the most part, that's what people thought should be continued. However, there was still support for single-family residences with accessory apartments, which is something that is allowed in the zoning, that we hope that people will start to take more and more advantage of. With some support for 2 families and duplexes, and then townhouses. The other options, 3-4 family and multifamily, didn't quite have the same sort of support. But so again, you know, most of us in Andover are homeowners, single-family detached houses. We love it here. We're comfortable here. We like to see that sort of development. And so, unsurprisingly, we sort of see a path forward in Andover. That sort of would be a preferred option. Then we asked about community resilience and sustainability, looking at some potentially environmental factors that may encounter Andover over the next 10 years. And how should we rank these? Again, this was ranked top priority, low priority. The longest bars were the largest responses. The most popular response in this was upgrading our roads, our bridges, our culverts, to basically respond to increasing storm frequency and intensity, more flooding events, more environmental damage to our road infrastructure, was something that was treated very, very important. Upgrading our power, data infrastructure, and then making sure Andover's road network was friendly to bicycle and pedestrian travel. That's the yellow one. We're also relatively popular, stood out a little bit among sort of the noise of the others, which included alternative energy infrastructure, things like solar, community gardens, discouraging new construction in floodplain areas or flood-prone areas, and investing in creating access. So all of those were kind of mixed results, but definitely people saw roads, bridges, culverts, and things like that as something that the town should be spending its money on. We looked at natural resources, again asking the same questions, rank the priorities. Longest bars are the most popular. The most popular being focus on our trails, connecting our trail systems both in the town and to other town trail systems, so we have a real network. Some of the other popular ones we're focusing on Andover Lake, water quality issues, investing in stewardship and care of the lands that we already have. So there's a lot of open space, there's a lot of preserved forest land in town. Making sure that that gets taken care of is something that frequently gets sort of left behind even after a property is preserved. And then looking at things like investing in active recreation and passive recreation also had some support. But definitely this is a trails town. And we may thank Eric for voting on that one probably 40 or 50 times. So again, we looked at the long-range plan that was done a couple of years ago. We basically put this question back out there. These were the priorities that were identified in the long-range plan, and we wanted to see where people fell out on that. I think this was basically a 1 through 5 to agree, strongly agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree. And of the 5 priorities of the long-range planning study, the one that rated easily the highest, the weighted average, was that the town should actively market available and undeveloped commercial land along Route 6, which again, sort of fits with the fact that people seem to recognize, obviously so, that Route 6 is sort of the best opportunity for economic development of the type that would be suitable for Andover. And people want more of it, particularly the retail service type uses. That was listed as the the strongest agreement on the long-range plan. And then we asked a little bit about town government itself, the services that are provided by the town, the schools, the transfer station, general government, senior services, public works, and which people supported. What's interesting, so this was available online, obviously on SurveyMonkey, hopefully most of you filled it out there. We also had many hard copies available at the town hall, at the library, for people to fill out a hard copy who didn't want to, use the computer. The majority of people who filled out the survey online had strong support for, everyone had pretty strong support for public works, but there was much stronger support for Andover's public school system on the online survey. In the hard copy survey, there was more strengthened support for services for seniors. So we got a little bit of a demographic microcosm based on the method of filling out the survey. But overall, the schools are seen as very, very important. Public works, again, roads, bridges, culverts, things like that. And then services for seniors, general government services, things like tax collectors, the town clerk, the planning and zoning, are all seen as particularly important as well. But we asked a little bit about concerns, things we should be worried about a little bit or thinking about relative to Andover's future. We asked a number of things like climate change, changing demographics, loss of sense of character, aging infrastructure, overdevelopment of our natural resources, housing patterns, slow economic growth, crime, affordability, all of those things. And again, a very concerned to not at all concerned. Basically a 1 through 5, we gave them a weighted average. And the 2 highest ranking concerns are aging infrastructure, again, so we saw that with roads, bridges, culverts, as well as affordability of living in Andover. Which is, I think, I don't know, it's impressive and it's thoughtful, particularly because Andover is a town of home ownership. And everyone living here, most everyone who filled out the survey, owns their own house and is in a relatively stable, hopefully, housing condition, but still recognizes that housing is a challenge. Housing is getting more affordable. It is an increasing challenge, particularly for empty nesters who are maybe taking care of a bigger house with a lot of taxes, with a lot of utilities, would like an opportunity to downsize, but also stay in town. We see a lot of that reflected in concerns about affordability of living in Andover. We then asked a couple of open-ended questions. The first question was, what is something you hope will happen in Andover in the next 10 years? And people were all across the board, all a variety of things. And thanks to the thoughtful and diligent sorting through, Jed went through every open-ended response and categorized them about, some people might say, expense of government services, some people might say taxes. Those are kind of the same thing, and Jed took some of these diverse responses and categorized them. And so among our top, I don't know, this is top 8 or 9 hopes are growth of appropriate businesses, varieties in housing, particularly affordable housing, growth in our population, particularly young, roads and bridge improvements, safe rural community, lower taxes, town center, blight enforcement, several people called out the plaza, complete streets, and then more town activities in parks and recreation. These are hopes. And so these were, again, we had over 230 responses. Most people did fill out the sort of open-ended responses, and so these did stand out as common responses.
On that, before you go, we talked before about people wanting to see economic development and growth in Andover, and that came through as the #1 item here on your hope. What do you hope for? We're hoping for more economic development. But one of the things that was tied into that was that an awful lot of the people said we want economic development so that it lowers our taxes and we can afford to stay here. And one of the things that I learned from going through the Dollar General and thinking that that was going to provide the taxes that would make everything great is that the economic development is not going to solve that problem. I don't know what the answer is, but the Dollar General wasn't responsible for lowering the tax rate in town that you might have thought it was going to. So if you think the little economic growth by having a restaurant or a doctor's office, pharmacy, whatever it is that we want, is going to solve all our problems, not going to happen.
And I mean, to a certain extent, we hope that that's understood and somewhat reflected in responses. That, again, it's relatively small. A Dollar General is 5,000 square feet. It's, it's a building. It's a commercial building. It doesn't generate kids, but it's not, Microsoft World headquarters. It's not a $1 billion building. It's not going to really move the needle necessarily on the grand list, but it does provide a needed service. And again, people in the survey clearly stated that they want those services. They want those conveniences, stores, pharmacies, doctor's offices, things like that. Really, I think more about convenience and lifestyle than it is about taxes. Hopefully.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If there were an average 5 more businesses to come into Andover, a pharmacy, another restaurant, and 3 others, would that have a big impact on the taxes in our town overall if they were that popular to bring in the funding to lower our taxes?
I may defer this to Eric a little bit. I mean, a lot depends on exactly how big and expensive these buildings are, because essentially, I mean, a grand list is basically the value of taxable property.
Right.
And so if your house is worth, $300,000, a Dollar General might be worth $800,000. So it's basically the equivalent, and I'm making these numbers up, but it's basically equivalent to 2.5 houses. So it doesn't necessarily move the needle that much. It would help, but I don't think it's a game changer. It would take something like $50 Generals to move the mill rate down a point or two. So again, kind of making up the numbers, but that's the order of magnitude.
So the Dollar General brings in roughly $40,000 a year in taxes. So one of the things we did a while back, when I was still on the planning and zoning, is we did a quick study with the old town planner, the guy that was helping us out, Bill Warner, like what if scenarios. And so the first one we posed is, what does it take the businesses that we have and those types of businesses to generate a noticeable difference in the mill rate, say 10%. And it worked out to somewhere around, we'd have to have about 35 Andover plazas to make a 10% difference. And we took about 40 of the gas stations, and that's the range of things that would make a noticeable difference. You know, I mean, unfortunately, the types of businesses that would generate lots of revenue for a town like Andover tend to be very undesirable businesses, like the infusion station, which everybody was vehemently opposed, a trash-to-energy plant. Those are things that, you know, would make a significant difference in the mill rate in taxation, but also have enormous negatives.
Is that because Andover is just a small demographic size that to expect to have 15 or 20 more businesses will kind of drown out what Andover really is to bring the mill rate down?
I'm not sure we have the commercial real estate to even put on that many more businesses. But I mean, I look at it and say, something that's going to make a noticeable difference in your tax dollars is going to look something like the Berlin Turnpike, not like Route 6 as it is today. And if that's what everybody wants, then you know that's what the town pursues. But that's never been really what people wanted, as far as I can tell.
And in a lot of ways, that's precisely what this exercise is about, is to determine what that balance is. Because again, we call this the plan of conservation and development. And so, you know, what in town is important for preservation, and one of those things that's important for preservation is the sense of Andover and what kind of town this feels like, and the reason that you have all chosen to live here or stay here if you happen to have been born here. The things that make up Andover are the things that we want to protect. That said, we are also concerned about rising prices and convenience and things like that. And so where do we fit along that line? How much do we develop before it stops feeling like Andover? And that's the purpose of this plan. So when we ask people the same question, I'm sorry, yes, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, if you allow apartments and low-cost housing and more housing, is that going to have an effect on utilities, like the water and the septics?
The answer, as with most things, is it depends. I mean, Andover is dependent on private wells, private septic system, and there are, for any development, whether it's a single-family residence, whether it's an apartment, has to go through a fairly rigorous review process through the Department of Public Health, possibly even DEP, to make sure that it's not compromising public health and safety in the surrounding area. So, septic systems are, frankly, over-designed in Connecticut. We are extremely conservative in the way we design our septic system. So, properly designed, properly installed, a septic system, even an apartment, even a large apartment, should not affect environmental conditions. And if you have a large-scale public water supply, community water system that would serve an apartment, that needs to go through the Department of Public Health also to basically do all kinds of yield testing, groundwater testing. Before anyone can get a community water system license, they basically need to monitor groundwater levels over the course of a year or more to make sure that the water draw for the new use does not negatively affect the neighbors within the aquifer in the area. It's not to say that nothing ever changes and no one is ever affected, but we have a lot of environmental safeguards in place to make sure that we only build what the ground, because we rely on the ground for groundwater, ground for wastewater renovation, only what the ground can tolerate. We hope. But then, yeah, there are systems in place. It should be protected, but I can't say that it never, ever happens. And again, you know, we're in a time of a changing climate. We're wetter and more intense at times. We are drier at times. We have droughts, and so there's complicating factors. So sometimes, you know, apartment building could get approved and built when we just happen to be in a 3-year drought cycle, and people's, you know, wells are not yielding what they used to. It's very easy to point your finger at the apartments and say, they're sort of colorful out of our water. But the fact is, we're just in a drought. So it's a complicated answer, but we have safeguards in place that it shouldn't. It shouldn't. We maybe can add that to one of our concerns, which was the question we asked. And again, thanks to Jed for summarizing a lot of these. Again, when we talk about high cost of living and taxes, were probably the most common. Crime was mentioned frequently, despite the fact that if I'm going to go back just a couple. Crime in Andover, one of the concerns we asked about, was actually quite low. Most people didn't have like very high concern, but it did show up in the open-ended responses. People did mention crime. And a lot of that, I think there was a lot of like speeding and things like that also. You know, so public safety sort of broadly defined. Losing our residents, again, people moving out, particularly the young people. People are concerned about growth, as well as the small town character loss that may go along with that, school spending. Conversely, we had a number of people worried about too much growth. Unsurprisingly, we had other people concerned about not enough growth. So that may indicate that we're kind of headed in the right track if people on both sides of the growth curve are equally upset. More affordable housing, and then speeding and road safety. Several people, particularly the handwritten responses, I'll know, had some concerns about the threat of roundabouts in town.
So John, before you go on there, you know, when everybody's concerned about the high cost of living in Andover, you know, there were certainly a lot of seniors that said, you know, high cost of living in Andover is difficult for us. There were a bunch of folks, you know, we talked about Andover being a fairly wealthy town, if you will. You know, the median salary is up there pretty good for the household income. There's a lot of people that were saying, we're willing to pay more taxes. We want to pay more taxes to help the town. So, you know, and it's certainly not a planning and zoning thing, but one of the things that the senior organization can do is look at, you know, how do we give a little tax break to the seniors to allow those folks that can afford to pay more taxes to build up, you know, for funding the school. You know, we saw that that chart that showed the 0 to 5-year-old kids is starting to grow a little bit. That's great news. The downside is, you know, each one of those kids that goes to school, you know, raises the cost of education there. So it's great news, but it makes the number one problem worse in that it's getting more expensive to live there. So all of it's kind of on both sides of the issue, which kind of led me to the conclusion that maybe we were doing things okay. We had the question about, you know, are we going to have too many houses that tax our water, sewer, you know, the septic, and that kind of thing? I'm happy if we could get a few more houses, you know, especially to meet the affordable housing goals, but the population projections were dropping off. You know, we don't want that. I don't think it's going to turn around and we're going to be the thriving metropolis, but we ought to be holding our own, and that's going to cause, that'll require us to build more housing, more affordable housing, not low-income housing, but affordable for the, you know, the average worker or the retiree to be able to go afford to stay here.
Then just a little bit of demographics, and unfortunately, we did not ask people's names, we didn't ask for people's emails, which is unfortunate because if Jed is saying more people were willing to pay more, we could have matched those people up and given the names to Eric. out. But the mix was pretty good. It was pretty reflective of what actually is in Andover. We had, most people were between 45 and 69, big chunks with significant population from 30 to 45 and then over 70. But and again, if you remember sort of the demographic curve, it pretty much reflects the adult population in Andover. So I think we had a pretty good representative sample. Again, do you own or rent your home? Not surprisingly, we are a home ownership community. And then household income, again, reflecting most people were above the 75,000, significant numbers above 100,000, even 150, reflecting Andover's demographics that we see. Okay, all of that is prologue, and I'll continue to buzz along. I don't want to take people whole evening here. But taking all of that, we had a conversation in the Planning and Zoning Commission about the kind of Andover that we wanted to see going forward. And we spent a couple of months working on this and basically came up with the vision statement that will guide the whole plan of conservation and development. And with your indulgence, I'm going to read it because it's important to hear, I think, out loud and hear the kind of Andover we want to see. The Town of Andover Planning and Zoning Commission, in developing this update to the 2015 Plan of Conservation and Development, is guided by a deep commitment to conserving and enhancing the historic rural atmosphere of Andover, and by the intent to promote actions and policies that will encourage a safe, connected, and sustainable community where wider opportunities are available to all. A fundamentally rural agricultural nature has defined the community of Andover for centuries, and it continues to be a critical component of the town's self-identity as it faces the next decade. Making investments in conservation of forests, farms, trail systems, and open spaces will help reinforce this rural tradition. At the same time, certain elements of change must be acknowledged and used to guide appropriate growth. An aging population, limited housing and commercial diversity, continued needs for infrastructure and investment, and a changing climate also demand proactive plans and active responses. We envision an Andover that provides housing, educational, recreational, and civic opportunities that maintain the community's excellent quality of life. We envision an Andover that strives to create more affordable housing, to welcome a wider variety of new residents and households, and ensures opportunities for residents to thrive throughout their life stages. We envision an Andover that safeguards the integrity of our natural, agricultural, and historic resources through sustainable conservation. We envision economic development that takes advantage of major transportation and trail corridors that serves the economic needs of the community and is scaled to fit within the spirit and pace of Andover. We envision a safe and vibrant Andover that connects the community through a network of complete streets and enhances the town's civic campus on both sides of Route 6 at its heart. We envision civic investment in infrastructure that acknowledges and takes measures to address climate change. Over the next decade, Andover will continue to integrate thoughtful development throughout town, balanced with conservation of agricultural and natural resources that are essential to the realization of this vision. So this is the guiding statement that will form the backbone of the Plan of Conservation and Development as we write it. Now you'll note we have 6 we envision statements. Those we envision statements are basically form 6 themes, 6 major topic areas. And what we have done to start our next phase of the Plan of Conservation and Development is we have broken out each of those 6 we envision statements, and we'll start to establish goals and policies and actions that are in each of those categories. So we start with the we envision statement about housing, educational, recreational, and civic opportunities, and we'll be beginning to talk about elements that make that up, including our housing, our school system, parks and rec, government, and that sort of thing, and so on. We'll do this with the affordable housing one, looking at seniors and downsizers, new residents. Similarly, about natural resources and cultural resources, looking at farm viability, open space acquisition, stewardship, historic preservation, and other conservation efforts. With economic development, again, targeting businesses, location, regulatory adjustments to encourage these things. And then the last two, safe and vibrant Andover, that looks at complete streets. Again, building on our complete streets plan, focusing on bike and pedestrian connections and making sure that roads are safe for all users and highlighting our trail connections within and beyond town. And then looking at the infrastructure. The civic campus investment, that this fabulous new facility, our roads, bridges, culverts, and things like that. Building on the sustainable Connecticut, public water infrastructure, all of those things. So this is sort of yet to come. We have established the vision. We have sort of split this up into workable pieces for topical discussion and for identification of goals. And this is where we're going next. The next 6 to 9 months is going to be spent in these 6 topic areas, starting to flesh out those individual goals and actions. A couple of quick takeaways, and Jed and Eric talked a little bit about some of these already from our survey, from our discussions. You know, Andover continues to be a great place to live, to go to school, and to thrive throughout all life stages. We're doing great things with complete streets, with the recreation field improvements, and are continuing to working on those things. People are concerned about cost of living, about loss of character that may come with the economic growth that is necessary to address some of those cost of living concerns. We have a clear lack of housing, not only for new residents, but also a growing concern from existing residents, young families, downsizers, and the range of housing opportunities. And again, while the trends are looking either stagnant, maybe shrinking a little bit, there is some hope or thought that our population is stabilizing and that there is opportunity to continue to grow as we go forward. That's where we are right now. Again, this is a work in progress. There's been a lot of work to this point, thanks to the work of planning and zoning, thanks to all of you who participated in the survey and in conversations like this, and we will absolutely look towards continued conversation again over the next 6 to 9 months as we start digging into some of those very specific goals when we start talking about what are we going to do for housing, what are we going to do for roads, what are we going to do for complete streets, what are we going to do for business growth. All those topics will be fleshed out over the next year or so. So that's it for me. Questions, comments? Hank.
Yeah, so great presentation, by the way. Nice, logical flow of process. With the Conservation Commission, we've been working very closely on natural resource inventory and looking at the open space. And I think one of the greatest challenges looking at some of the responses and some of the areas to focus on is along that Route 6 corridor. That is obviously a major transportation corridor identified as a major area of economic growth, but that's also where the Hop River corridor system is, which is a very unique natural resource for both natural resources for wildlife and for wetlands and various habitats, but also for recreational use, obviously with trails. And it's actually a tale of sort of 2 sides of Route 6. The north side is where the floodplain is and where a lot of the resources are concentrated, which is very different from the south side, where it's more forested, more upland. It's a different sort of ecosystem. So I see that as one of the challenges of looking how to balance projected growth along that corridor with preservation of the natural resources, the agricultural areas along that system, especially on that south side. And I think as you go forward with the process, one of the things I think that will be important as we look at, because we tend to look at these things, for example, in the Conservation Commission, we've been looking very narrowly focused on the natural resources and conservation. Others may be looking at recreation or economic development or various housing and things like that. Is where do we see mandates and cross purposes on these terms, where we're recommending that this is an area for preservation, while in economic development I recommend that as an area for commercial growth or so forth. We have to look at that. Oftentimes the solutions to that is really the where and how those develop. But I think that making sure that we just don't put all the pieces together without doing a little bit of an analysis of where those potential conflict areas are, so that we can have some healthy discussions about how to resolve those.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions or comments from anybody?
I'd really like to thank the zoning commission and John for getting us up to this point. I think, you know, they're going through a great process to really kind of understand what we need to do to thrive and move forward as a town.
So it's important that you're all here. It's fantastic. A great indication on a random Thursday night in the fall that we have so many people here. So thank you for your time, thank you for your interest, and hopefully thank you in advance for your continued participation in these conversations.
And I know it's -5 points on my part because I didn't introduce myself right off the bat. If any of you who don't know me,